So today, the sutta that I'm going to read from is from the Anguttara Nikaya, 1061. Does that ring any bells for any sutta heads here? That is called Delusion or Avidya, and it's a very beautiful sutta which points out a beautiful causal sequence. And most of the suttas in the last part of this wonderful Word of the Buddha book, with Ajahn Brahm's translation, are from the Anguttara Nikaya, and they all point towards a practice of causality. And personally for me, I find this extremely inspiring and encouraging, because what it's really pointing to is that the practice, or the progress if you like, is natural. It's a natural course of cause and effects. So when the causes are in place, the effects have to manifest at some point or the other. But of course we need enough wisdom to understand what causes to put in place and which kind of causes lead to what kind of results. So if we're putting in causes for our misery, misery is bound to come. If we're putting in causes for our happiness or for our gravitas, then gravitas is bound to come. If you eat food without much fat, you'll be thin. If you eat food with a lot of fat and don't exercise much, you'll be fatter. So this is law of nature, and the beautiful thing about it is that it applies to everybody, regardless of race, of gender, of sexual orientation, whatever, kind of personal attributes you take yourself to be or to have, the causes work the same. And of course, these are all causes for the psychology of the mind and what actually happens when we practice the path. So this one is called Avidya, and the translation is delusion. And before I go any further with it, I just want to point out why the word avidya is translated here as delusion and not ignorance, because ignorance means a lack of knowledge. Okay, so if there's a lack of knowledge, the remedy would be to get more knowledge, to study, to go to school, to go to university, to listen to great nuns and monks, right? But is that enough? When we talk about the Buddha as being vidya charana sampanno, perfect in knowledge and conduct, or is it something else? Is it vidya, wisdom and knowledge, wisdom and conduct, right? Right conduct, beautiful ethical conduct comes through wisdom, not through knowledge. There are many clever, intelligent people in the world, some of them tyrannical, right? We know some of the leaders in the world, not the ones without many brains, but there are leaders with brains. But it doesn't make them ethical. It doesn't make them kind. It doesn't make them compassionate for the welfare of all beings. So knowledge is not enough. And really, I think what's lacking in our education systems, in the values of our societies, is compassion and ethics. Imagine if we learnt those things at school. Apparently in Denmark, they have empathy classes once a month for the kids, where they learn to kind of imagine what it's like to be a little fluffy bunny rabbit, scared for its life. And they have to stroke the rabbit and get to know it and actually kind of imagine how it might feel. And this kind of empathy will lead to much more compassion, much more fellow feeling in the world. So delusion is a much better translation of avidya, and of course the opposite of delusion is wisdom. Yeah, wisdom, not knowledge, not understanding even, but wisdom, something that actually determines a different course for your life. It has to manifest in real changes, real kind of paradigm shifts. So I'll come back to talk about delusion a little bit more after I go through the sequence, because it's a really fascinating subject. And the Buddha always said there wasn't a first cause for delusion, as we'll see, but there are such a thing as nutriments. So it's not possible to discern the beginning of samsara, right? The beginning of how all this came to be. It's here. Existence is here. We misapprehend what that existence means, but it's right here. All of us are living in a human body with a human mind. So we can't deny that, and that's what we know, that's what we have to work with. But the Buddha said there's no beginning of delusion, and you can't find where samsara began. But we can understand what nourishes it and causes it to persist. So here we go. And this is a really nice translation. Also because the word used is meditators rather than monks or even monastics, so it includes everybody on the path. Meditators. Some say that a first beginning of delusion cannot be seen such that before then there was only wisdom, and after then delusion came to exist. I say that delusion has a nutriment, and the word is ahara, which is also the word for food. The nutriment for delusion is the 5 hindrances. The 5 hindrances have a nutriment, or a food, a sustenance. The 3 kinds of misconduct, that's of body, speech, and mind. The 3 kinds of misconduct have a nutriment, lack of sense restraint. Lack of sense restraint has a nutriment, lack of mindfulness and wisdom. Lack of mindfulness and wisdom has a nutriment, careless attention, or ayonisa manasikara. Some of you might know that as wise attention or unwise attention, ayoniso manasikara, but we'll get into that more a little bit later on. So careless attention or unwise attention has a nutriment, lack of faith, saddha, or confidence. Lack of faith has a nutriment, not hearing the true Dhamma. Not hearing the true Dhamma has a nutriment, not associating with good persons. I think the Pali is sapurisa here, rather than kalyanamitta or arya puggala. So good persons, but it means ethical persons, and ideally those who've actually seen the Dhamma, so stream winner and above. Thus, not associating with good persons, becoming full, fills up not hearing the good Dhamma. Not hearing the good Dhamma, becoming full, fills up a lack of faith. Lack of faith, becoming full, fills up careless or unwise attention. Careless attention, becoming full, fills up lack of mindfulness and wisdom. Lack of mindfulness and wisdom, becoming full, fills up non-restraint of the sense faculties. Non-restraint of the sense faculties, becoming full, fills up the 3 kinds of misconduct. The 3 kinds of misconduct, becoming full, fill up the 5 hindrances. The 5 hindrances, becoming full, when you're full of the 5 hindrances, they fill up delusion. Thus, there is nutriment for delusion, and in this way, it keeps full. So I'll read the beautiful little simile here before we get on to the second sequence and go into this one in a bit more depth. And it's a very lovely simile, again, a simile taken from nature, something we can observe. Just as when rain pours down in thick droplets on a mountaintop, the water flows down along the slope and fills the clefts, the gullies and creeks. These becoming full fill up the pools. These becoming full fill up the lakes. These becoming full fill up the streams. These becoming full fill up the rivers, and these becoming full fill up the great ocean. Thus there is nutriment for the great ocean, and in this way it keeps full. Now let me find out. Okay, thus, so too, not associating with good persons, becoming full, fills up not hearing the good Dhamma. Not hearing the good Dhamma, becoming full, fills up lack of faith. Lack of faith fills up careless attention. Careless attention fills up lack of mindfulness and wisdom. Becoming full, they fill up non-restraint of the sense faculties, which fill up the 3 kinds of misconduct. And the 3 kinds of misconduct, becoming full, fill up the 5 hindrances, which, becoming full, fill up delusion. And in this way, it keeps full. So now you know how delusion is filled and how to trace it backwards so that we can start unraveling this big mess that we're all in and the reason that we're born. So let's have a look more closely at delusion first of all. So as I was saying, delusion doesn't mean ignorance. It means in a sense, not that you don't know something, it's not that you don't see something, but you misapprehend what it is that you see. So it's almost as if there's an object, maybe behind a veil or behind a screen, and you see it, it's real. You do know that it's there, but you see it as something it isn't, just like a puppet. You know, if somebody like holds their hand in a certain way and it looks like a rabbit, you see this thing, you think it's a rabbit, but actually it's a hand contorted in a certain way, right? So we actually don't see things the way they are, especially when the 5 hindrances are in operation, which is most of the time for most of us in our everyday lives, and even in our meditation to a great degree. And the Buddha also says that when the 5 hindrances are there, they nourish delusion and they obstruct wisdom. Right? So as long as we can't see things as they really are, we can't gain insight into what's really there. So one of the things that keeps this delusion in place, or if you like, its kind of operating mechanism, is what we call the vipalasas. And this is the thoughts, the views, and perceptions that all kind of whirl around each other and reinforce each other. So once you have a certain view, and the wrong view, according to the Buddha, is seeing things that are suffering as happiness, seeing things that are happiness as suffering, seeing what's impermanent as permanent, what's permanent as impermanent. Actually, nothing's permanent, so that one doesn't hold. But sometimes we think that there's something permanent inside, so we see it as permanent when it's actually impermanent. Seeing things that are non-self as self. Yeah? Most of us know intellectually that there's no self. We've heard the Buddha's teachings. But if something threatens your sense of self, how quickly does it consolidate? How much do you hold on? You know, we know these things intellectually, but when you're about to, say, be in a traffic accident, you know, you might think that you're ready to die at any moment, but if you're suddenly involved in a close head-on collision, my goodness, you panic. You want to live, right? So this will to live is very strong because we think there's someone there to live. We're so attached to this life and what we think we are. And what's the other one? So not seeing impermanence, or what's impermanent as permanent, seeing what's suffering as happiness, and seeing what's actually non-self as self, taking the to be a self in these 5 khandhas, which are completely out of our control. So this is what delusion is about. And in a sense, this is a perversion of perception. So our perception is distorted. When we think there's a self, we actually see a self there when there's nothing actually but a process. Yeah. So another really nice example of happiness and suffering is that we think there's something pleasurable in the 5 senses. And there's a nice example of this in the suttas. I think it's Venerable Ananda who actually, somebody comes to Venerable Ananda. Is it Venerable Ananda? Yeah. And they say that they're attached to sexual pleasure or something like this. And Venerable Ananda said it's basically a perversion of perception. You think it's pleasant, but actually it's a burning of the senses. It's a perversion of perception. There's another lovely sutta which says that what the noble ones take to be happiness, the worldly people, the people who are not yet awakened to the Dhamma, think that's suffering. And what the worldly people think is happiness, the noble ones say that's suffering. So this holds even when it comes to the pleasures of the mind. I was thinking of this just now in the meditation. You know, we call the jhanas, one of the definitions of the jhanas is nekama sukha, the bliss of renunciation. How many people think that renouncing is bliss, is happiness? Do you think that? So most of the time the word renunciation gets a really bad rap. It's kind of like this brittle and dry and miserable state where you just have to kind of give up all the things you enjoy. Who wants to renounce? Anyone here? You can't. You already did to some degree. The others who put their hands up, I'm going to have you on the list at Anukampa Grove. Any guys here who want to renounce? You already did, Ajahn, a long time ago.
Yeah.
You have enough happiness yet?
Yeah.
Yeah? Enough?
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty cool, isn't it? So, even this perception of pleasure is radically different between the Aryas and the worldlings. And I find this a really wonderful possibility for freedom because, honestly speaking, growing up in a nice family, in a nice little town, everything kind of supposed to be quite sweet and quite idyllic, I really wondered by the time I got to my teens if there was something wrong with me because I wasn't content. And nobody around me could explain why I was discontent. They all thought there was something wrong with me. And somehow I intuited that they were wrong, that actually there really was a problem here. And I could see it just by turning on the news, all the wars and the power struggles and the terrible, cruel ways that human beings treat one another. It was hard to live in my own little bubble and think that everything was okay. I'm sure many people here might experience this, and that's one of the reasons that brings you to the Dhamma. It's hard to turn away from the suffering of the world, and in a sense, when we have empathy and compassion, that suffering becomes our problem too. And so for me, I really needed a different solution than the ones I could see around me. Again, most of the people in my life were telling me the importance of a good education, the importance of getting a nice job, and I don't think they dared go so far as a family and children because I wasn't up for that. But, it was this sense that if you do everything right, if you just follow what people have always done, then you'll be happy. And I really had my doubts, to such an extent that I decided at 18 to leave England and actually to travel to Israel first of all, because in Israel I heard about these things called kibbutz. And that seemed very different, radically different from living in a very individualistic capitalist society. It was a different kind of social model where people shared resources in common. And so I went there, but even that wasn't really quite enough for me because what I realized was I was looking for a spiritual path. And no one in my hometown had told me there was such a thing. There was no talk of meditation in those days. I'm not that old, but it was a small town. And there was certainly no mention of Buddhism. I didn't know anything about Buddhism. But fortunately, I had a very good best friend who told me that why not go to India? Why don't we go to India next? Be a bit more adventurous. And so we got a one-way ticket to India and then on to Thailand with no return ticket back to the West. And it was really incredible that once we arrived in India, my goodness, the suffering was there to be witnessed and to be felt. And yet there was also this sense of meaning in the people that I met. There was this sense that, yes, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of hardship, impermanence, death, decay is all around. They don't hide death the way we do over here. Everything, life and birth and death is visible right before you in the streets. You also do see like recluses, samanas, people who are striving for the truth, looking, searching for something. And that search, that kind of spiritual inquiry was very much alive. I think it still is very alive in countries like India. And that was fascinating for me because it gave people a way to, in a sense, make meaning of the difficulties in human life, in human existence. And I knew that this was, there was something there to learn. So when I first did my retreat and heard the Buddha's teachings, that there is suffering, that suffering is a reality, and there's also a way out, it was so validating. I realized there was actually never anything wrong with me. Basically, this is life. This is what we're born into. The human existence, all existence, is the realm of suffering. Of course, in the human existence, we also have quite a high dose of happiness, enough to kind of help us understand that happiness is possible for us. But the Buddha was pointing to the cause of suffering. And the solution to happiness wasn't to get more and more. It wasn't to chase after sensual pleasure. It was actually to start on a path that leads to the end of suffering by eradicating the causes for that suffering, first of all. And those causes are greed, hate, and delusion. So little by little in the meditation, we're undermining the hindrances to start starving this delusion so that we do have a chance to see things as they are. And the more the 5 hindrances are overcome, the clearer we see, the more reliable what we see is, and the more we can take it to be something closer to the truth. So delusion has a nutriment, and the nutriment for delusion is the 5 hindrances, which we talked about today. And those hindrances can be very subtle. You know, most of us know when we have sensual desire, it's very coarse, it's actually quite agitating. And through my old practice of working with the sensations in the body and learning to be really equanimous, really, really sensitive, first of all, to the very subtle sensations, but also develop a degree of equanimity, I did experience a wide range of bodily sensations and also mental feelings too, mental experience and experience in the 5 senses. And some of them were very refined. And yet even the refined, pleasant feelings started to feel like suffering compared to much deeper equanimity, or what we sometimes call the adukkha adsukham vedana, which is a kind of neutral sensation. And Ajahn Brahm was talking about this from the perspective of the jhanas yesterday, which is really deep practice of these experiences of the mind. And it's interesting that the 4th jhana, based on equanimity, with equanimity really strong, is more pleasant, more blissful than the earlier jhanas, where piti and sukha are still present. So this is how subtle the path can get. At first, what we think is happiness seems to be happy, but when we experience something even subtler than that, then we naturally turn away from those coarser pleasures. So when it comes to this craving for sensual pleasure, sometimes it's not even craving for the object. We realize we're actually just addicted to craving itself. Yeah? And I don't know if you've noticed that in the meditation. Sometimes when you start to become peaceful or get a degree of contentment, still there's a sort of sticky-fingered wanting that comes to the fore. Sometimes contentment's a little bit challenging to the sense of self because we still want to crave. There's still a sense that if I just do a little bit more, I can get something more, or I can get a bit deeper, I can get more contentment, more peace. So sometimes it's the wanting itself which we're addicted to. And it's a habit, right? We don't even know what it is that we want, but we just want for the sake of wanting. And really that's just bhava tanha, wanting to exist, wanting to show that we're still in control. So these kind of movements of the mind are very subtle, but they're the ones that kind of prevent us going deeper into a jhana. You know, many times, and I hear a lot of interviews from meditators at Jhana Grove and on the retreats that I teach, people get to the stage of nimittas, these beautiful bright lights in the mind. But from there, it's quite difficult to take the next step. And the usual reason is because there's not enough contentment. You know, something arises like a beautiful light or bliss in the mind, and we feel we have to do something. It moves us somehow away from the present moment. There's a little bit of discontent, or it's not developing fast enough or deep enough, or it's not stable enough, it's not bright enough. That's a subtle hindrance of discontent. Another word for discontent is wanting, isn't it? It's just a wind that blows the mind away from the present moment. And the aversion. You know, most of the time, hopefully, you're really good people. Hopefully you're not sitting there thinking about how you can take revenge on this person from the council that's giving us such a hard time. Of course, he's just doing his job like everybody else and, you know, is used to the language of threats. It's not a language that I like to use. But anyway, hopefully you don't threaten yourself and bully yourself in that way. But you might find that when you get into your meditation, there is this subtle discontent again, this subtle aversion, which manifests sometimes as boredom, or it might manifest as, again, restlessness. These hindrances are very connected. And it's just enough discontent to kind of, again, take you away from the moment. You think that it's going to be better somewhere else. You want to get away from what you have right now. You've not fully made peace with it or really allowed it to be. And at the beginning of the meditation, Ajahn Brahm was saying, even if something does feel unpleasant, can you really just stay with it and let it be? Don't even try to, shoo it off, to make it go away. Sometimes it's very subtle, we even practice contentment and metta and loving kindness to overcome unpleasant feelings. But real contentment, real loving kindness simply allows those unpleasant feelings to be, to stay as long as they want and to leave when the causes for them to be there disappear. So can we really have that unconditional mindfulness or kindfulness, that unconditional loving kindness that overcomes those last traces of ill will? The restlessness, again, is something that just takes us slightly away from the present. We can be in the present to a great extent. Maybe the thoughts have subsided, you're not being pulled back from the past to the future, the past again. Fantasy world in the distant future, something that will never happen anyway. But sometimes it's just that we're not quite focused enough. And I was practicing with this a lot during the Rains retreat recently, really building up that foundation of present moment awareness and seeing just how present I can be. And quite often the attention is just a little bit smudged into the future or the past. I think Ajahn Brahm gave this simile this morning of like the camera lens being slightly out of focus, and we can just gently, gently move our mind into more focus, not with tightness, not with too much effort, but just bring it a little bit more present. Just allow the mind to really settle, to really sink in a sense. And you may find at that point something shifts. It can be a subtle stage, maybe before the nimitta arises or even between the nimitta and the jhana, that the mind is still just hankering slightly into the future. It's just slightly in the past, holding on to what just happened. But if we can just suddenly become more aware in the present, something shifts. Basically, you start moving inward instead of onward to the next step. And then the sloth and torpor often comes up in meditation in a subtler way when we start experiencing the feelings that are more neutral, that are more peaceful. Maybe at first they're less distinct. And this is often because our minds are quite coarse, aren't they? We only really notice something distinctly unpleasant or particularly pleasant. If you have a treacle sponge which doesn't have much sugar in it, would you even bother eating it? I don't know. If it's just neutral, it's kind of dull, it's boring. Our minds aren't attuned to that yet. And I think I already mentioned a meditation I had many years ago that felt fairly neutral until I actually opened my mind to a subtler kind of pleasure that was there all the time, that I just hadn't quite noticed because I was looking for something more obvious. And the simile that came to mind to me at that time was like tuning into a different frequency. When you're trying to use like a radio dial on the old radios and you have to kind of get it just right to get the program in tune. It's like the program's there all along, but you're just a little bit out of attunement with it. And if we can just tune in to that different frequency, you'll find you have all the happiness that's available right there, right where you are. It's just sometimes a matter of staying that bit longer and looking a bit more closely, allowing things to unfold. And then the doubt in our meditation. It's not so much doubt about whether you're on the right path, but sometimes you're meditating, you have confidence in the Buddha's teachings, but there's still this sense of, am I doing it right? Or shouldn't it be going faster? Why is the nimitta keep, disappearing and taking me back to the breath? How come, the light isn't bright enough? Or how come it's a little bit smudged? And it's just this doubt. So many times people ask the question, is this supposed to be happening? Should this be happening? And I usually say, well, if it's happening, then of course it should be, because it's a natural product of cause and effect. So it's so important just to keep that confidence really strong and to wait in the moment, to be patient with the process. And eventually your confidence will grow. So with these 5 hindrances slowly getting undermined, we have an opportunity to starve delusion for a while and to see things more clearly. So what is the nutriment for the 5 hindrances? And in this sutta it says the 5 hindrances have a nutriment, and that is the 3 kinds of misconduct. So body, speech and mind. So I don't know if you've noticed in your life that if you do have, do something that's unskillful, maybe you say something hurtful to somebody, how often is it that we take that into our meditation in the evening and we simply can't settle down? You go over and over and over it, and the mind becomes increasingly restless and discontent. So whenever we have these 5 hindrances, they lead to those 3 kinds of misconduct, and also the 3 kinds of misconduct fuel the hindrances. So the best way to start to undermine the hindrances, as we spoke about in the gradual training, is to cultivate a virtuous life. Virtue of body, speech and mind. So the 3 kinds of misconduct have a nutriment, a lack of sense restraint. So sometimes the way we perceive the world, the way we perceive our lives, leads to misconduct. One of the obvious examples is sexual misconduct. We're looking at things in a certain way. We're looking at people in a way that rouses lust, rouses attraction. When really the Buddha's advice was always, and I think this would be very good for young monks actually to reflect on this, because it's difficult. It's fair enough. It is difficult to live the life of a celibate monk, I think especially, because you are starving these pleasures of the senses and this kind of natural urge to express ourselves that way. But, the Buddha's advice was to actually regard all beings as our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers, and our spiritual friends. So I often say to Ajahn Brahm that I think one of the best ways for especially people who are practicing for the end of liberation to really deal with these issues of lust and also anger is to regard one another as siblings, as spiritual friends. And I think the more we can learn about people who are different, for especially between the 2 genders, for people who are heterosexual, to actually live with one another as friends and to understand life from each other's perspectives. It brings a lot more empathy and compassion into relationship. And we stop regarding each other as objects, just kind of eye candy or objects of delight. Obviously, if we want to focus on a person's faults, it's going to lead to anger. And how often is it that, when we constantly think about somebody in a certain way, when we meet them, we're much more likely to say something mean, to say something unkind. So the next one, lack of sense restraint has a nutriment, lack of mindfulness and wisdom. So as I was saying the other day, mindfulness and sense restraint go hand in hand. If we're not mindful, we don't really know how we're using our senses or even how these defilements arise. We're just too slow to notice how these things creep in. So mindfulness and wisdom, I think this is sati sampajanya here. Knowing what you're doing and why. How are you regarding things, and is it skillful? Is it leading to wholesome states? Lack of mindfulness and wisdom has a nutriment, careless attention, ayoniso manasikara. So careless attention is the opposite of yoniso manasikara, or wise attention, careful attention, which is basically seeing things in terms of the Dhamma, and particularly in terms of non-self. When we can see things through the lens of non-self. And in a way, all of these are perceptions until we've actually changed those perceptions through deep insight. We're using perception in a way that undermines these defilements and brings more happiness, more clarity to our mind. So being able to just see things in terms of non-self. And one of the ways that helps is to, because it's a bit abstract when we talk about non-self. I don't know how many people here really can get your head around that. Is it easy to understand, non-self? What are we if we're not a self? But it is easier, perhaps, to start seeing things as not mine, not belonging to me, not my possession, not under my control. In the Anattalakkhana Sutta, the Buddha says repeatedly, again and again, he goes through each one of these 5 khandhas. Does everybody know the 5 khandhas? The 5 components of existence? Yes, no? Anyone not know? Nobody doesn't know. That's amazing. Okay. It's fine if you don't. And actually, to be honest, nobody really understands it in full until you're a stream winner. So you're the humble ones, the ones who said you didn't know. So the 5 khandhas are basically a description of the body and mind and our experience as human beings, or as any being for that matter, I think. Isn't it? Most beings, at least other than those that live in the formless realms, have these 5 khandhas in place. So the first one is the body, rupa. The second one is vedana, or experience, usually described as the feeling of pleasure, the feeling of displeasure, in other words, pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and also the feelings that are in between, so-called neutral feelings. Feelings that can't really be described as pleasant or unpleasant, and the kind of feelings we often don't notice, as I was saying earlier on. And then the third one is perception, so the way we actually make sense of the world. We see something, we give it a name, and usually an evaluation as well. So our perceptions are usually deluded and also nourish this delusion. So much of the path is actually training to have perceptions that lead to wholesome states. And until we're really wise in the path, they'll always be a little bit skewed because delusion is present. So we don't really see things as we are. We perceive things according to our conditioned habits and tendencies, the way we've learned things in life. And then the fourth one is what Ajahn Brahm likes to translate as will. But it's also the product of what is willed. So the word sankhara actually means any conditioned phenomena, anything in this entire world. So will, what we do with our mind, like the doing part of the mind, but also anything, like even a cup of tea is a sankhara. I hate to tell you, it's conditioned. So it disappears. You okay, Ajahn Brahm? I have to say that. I know you're okay, but I'll look like a really cruel disciple if I don't check.
Just sankharas.
So coughing is also a sankhara. Anything that's basically fabricated, which is this whole samsaric existence. All of this is the conditioned world. So everything in it has causes and therefore is subject to cessation. But for, the purposes of practice, it's really those tendencies in the mind that come out and get involved, that start interfering, that doing part of the mind. It's not that there's a doer inside as a sort of permanent essence, but it's that sense of wanting to be involved, wanting to be in control, wanting the meditation to get deeper, etc., etc. And this is a whole heap of karma. This is like karma formations. So it can be ethical or unethical. And if it's ethical, it leads to more happiness. If it's unethical, it leads to more misery, at least in the future, if not immediately. And then the last one of the 5 khandhas is the consciousness itself, or the consciousnesses, the 6 consciousnesses related to the 5 senses and the mind. So we have eye consciousness, nose consciousness, ear consciousness, taste consciousness, or tongue consciousness, body consciousness, the feelings in the body, similar to Vedana, right? It has 3 different types. You can have pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feelings, consciousness of those things. And then mind consciousness, the knowing part of the mind. And this is also conditioned. This is also subject to cessation. It also arises from a cause and passes away when that cause is removed. So all these 6 consciousnesses are non-self. Body is non-self, feeling is non-self, perception, sankhara. Sankhara is the will again, anything conditioned, and consciousness is not me, not mine, not a self. But the Buddha went further and he said, we cannot have of any of these things, may they be this way and not that way. Because they're impermanent, they're suffering and they're non-self, we cannot control them. We can't say, may I have pleasant feelings only and no unpleasant feelings. If we do that, we're causing more suffering for ourselves, because whenever you have unpleasant feelings, you're going to be like, oh no, I didn't want this, I wanted pleasant feelings. So the Buddha said, we cannot have of feelings, may you be this way, may you not be this way. Basically, feelings are conditioned and they are non-self. So I don't know how that sounds, if that sounds scary or if it sounds like a relief. To me, this is a kind of relief, because it means there's no point even trying to control. Right? And the more we understand the nature of happiness, that happiness doesn't come actually from pleasant feelings or experiences. Happiness is more a state of mind. It's much easier to let go of this constant struggle, to find comfort, to find contentment in this realm of the 5 senses, and in particular in the realm of physical feelings. Because they're constantly changing. Many of us might have diseases right now inside of us that we don't even know about. We can't take this health for granted. So the Buddha's advising us to find a different path to happiness, a path of happiness that goes within. So when we start to see things through this lens of non-self, then wisdom and mindfulness can grow. So a lack of mindfulness and wisdom has as its nutriment not seeing things with this careful attention, in other words, careless attention. Careless attention has a nutriment, lack of faith. And lack of faith has a nutriment, not hearing the true Dhamma. So again here we're going back to this gradual training that we talked about the first day, that when we hear the Dhamma for the first time, we hear the beautiful teachings of the Buddha, this gives rise to faith. It gives rise to confidence. And we start to see things in a new light. We start to know how to practice, first of all. And once we start to practice, we start to get some results, which increase the faith further. I remember in the early years of my practice life, I don't know for you people here, but often the early years of practice are the most transformative. It's just incredibly inspiring to finally find a path, and a path that works. I don't know, how many people here are coming to retreat for the first time? Yeah? Wow. Hopefully that faith is arising for you by now. You're seeing that maybe this is something that I can continue to develop and explore. This is something different. It's something that's not easily available in the world. And there are people practicing. You can see the results. And so when this confidence starts to arise, we get enormous power and energy to really put the practice into place and to make time in our lives to practice. So not hearing the Dhamma has a nutriment. Yes.
What is
Careless attention. Well, yeah, can you explain, Ajahn? Because I think we spoke about it earlier and you were saying not seeing things in line with the Dhamma, but it's not really very obvious how to interpret it here.
Yonisa Manasikara, not seeing things as like cause and effect, where it comes from. A good example of that is, when, I'm going to go off a bit in one of my stories. I can't help.
I want to finish this though.
Oh,
but anyway, go on.
When people ask Ajahn Chah, why did he become a monk? What inspired him, to renounce? And he said that when he was a kid in the village, they'd play games. They didn't have any electric equipment, so they just played little games like house. But his favourite game was monk. And he'd always, he's only about 5 or 6 years of age, he'd always volunteer to be the monk. Why? It's because as a little kid, he would get a brown rag from somewhere, put it around his shoulders and sit on a rock, and all his friends would bring him food. And that's what convinced him to be a monk one day. Sorry.
That wouldn't work as a bhikkhuni. Anyway,
Yes, okay.
anyway, moving on. But careless attention, I mean, from the perspective of careful attention being seeing things as not self, I think careless attention is kind of the way we create people as fixed entities could be one example.
Good.
You know, the way we create a very strong perception and judgment of other people. You know, really believing that a person is like this. And when you really believe that and you don't see why a person behaves the way they do, what kind of suffering they've had to go through, what kind of burdens they have right now on their shoulders, obviously we don't always know, but not even taking the time to inquire because you really have such a fixed view that a person is something solid and something fixed. I think this could be a good example because, right, and not seeing that things change, like not giving people the chance to change. That can apply to ourselves as well, right? We think that, oh, how many people here think you're not a good meditator? Right, so that's careless attention because you are not even a meditator. You're actually just 5 khandhas. There is no meditator. Who is the meditator? Are you the body? Is the meditator the Vedana? Is that the meditator? Who's doing the meditation? So when we see things in a very fixed and solid way, then of course it's easy to generate unwholesome states. But when we start seeing that everything is just causes and conditions, again, that's the whole purpose of these suttas, is that it's pointing out a causal sequence. And it's a causal sequence that isn't fixed. We have the opportunity to, in a sense, like influence the trajectory of our lives. Right? Influence. Have you noticed when you meditate, if you suddenly start thinking like, I've got a nimitta, or, you know, I am now getting some bliss, you immediately grasp at it, right? Or you start to get like some polish on your sense of self. It's like, my. And doesn't that just ruin everything? So that when it doesn't happen next time, you feel like you failed. But if you actually just saw this as a product of conditions, not you, not yours, just a phenomena arising for a while and passing away afterwards, then you could, as it were, kiss the pleasure as it flies. Is that right? Kiss the joy as it flies? That's another of your favourite poems. Isn't that by Robert Burns? Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Is it something, eternity
Remember that?
sunrise? Is
The
it
Blake?
Blake?
Okay.
One who kisses the pleasure as it flies. Is that right? Can you say it? Do you know it? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Basically, it's like, if there's pleasure, let it come. If there's pain, let it come. Everything's passing through. And that way we don't build a sense of self around our attainments and around our so-called failures. So then we have more faith. So lack of faith fills up this careless attention. Careless attention fills up lack of mindfulness and wisdom. Lack of mindfulness and wisdom. Oh, hang on, we've missed out the good people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go on about that. So lack of faith has a nutriment, which is not hearing the good Dhamma. Not hearing the good or the true Dhamma has a nutriment. Not associating with good persons. So this really takes us right back to the beginning of is it the opposite way around? There's another sutta that, the opposite way around actually starts the positive sequence by associating with good persons. So in a sense, this is the beginning of the path. How do you hear the good Dhamma in the first place? To gain that confidence and then to gain this careful attention, etc., 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 eventually undermining delusion. We have to, first of all, come in contact with someone who is wise. If we don't, we're just continuing to spin around our own conditioning. You know, the old conditioned patterns will just keep going round and round and round. So it's almost as though we need a Buddha to arise to kind of put in a new program into the mind. So it's like you put a kind of virus in the samsaric program on the computer. The Buddha is that virus. He's actually saying there is an end to this. And once you hear that, it's almost impossible not to follow the path, not to follow the teachings. So it's so important in our lives to have good spiritual friends. And of course, if we have some kind of connection with the suttas directly, this is the very, very best. But often, for me anyway, it took having teachers, living examples of the Dhamma, or at least meditation methods to get me started. And then through some benefit in the practice, I was more and more fascinated by what the Buddha himself would teach. And I think that's one of the reasons we teach these suttas in these retreats. They're always going to be so much more profound than anything that even Ajahn Brahm, and certainly I, can say, More than you, Ajahn? Yes.
No comment.
No. Ajahn has very unshakable faith in the Buddha. I know that for a fact. And so the Buddha's words are always the best. And yet, to some extent, we need to associate with real human beings in order to discuss these teachings. In the Mangala Sutta that we're doing at the moment in my weekly Sutta class, it says that we don't own. One of the blessings of life, one of the highest blessings of life, is to hear the Dhamma. But another blessing, even higher than that, is to discuss the Dhamma, to actually contemplate it, to inquire, to apply, to, in a sense, analyze the Dhamma, to see it from different perspectives, to try to clarify our understanding, rather than just taking these words as black and white. Because the fact is that we will be reading the suttas even through our own delusions, right? It's incredible that I've heard even monks, not bhikkhunis yet, but I'm sure there are, who take very obscure passages of the Dhamma to justify really obscure and basically wrong views. So if you really want to find some kind of justification for some sort of eternal mind, you can kind of twist the words around. Interestingly, you can only find those words in suttas that are probably less authentic than the original teachings. So usually they're taken from suttas like the Sutta Nipata, that body of text. Many of those are authentic, but some are less credible, less easy to attribute to the Buddha. But if you go to the main texts, especially texts like the Samyutta Nikaya, Majjhima Digha and Anguttara, but especially I love the Samyutta Nikaya, go to the Nidana Samyutta or the Kanda Samyutta if you want to write that down. These are great. Chapter 12 and chapter 22 in the Samyutta Nikaya. It talks only about causality. It talks about the 5 khandhas, these components of existence, and how everything is conditioned, how this whole existence is basically a process of cause and effect, and how that cause and effect can come to cessation, how we can undo this whole mass of suffering and find complete liberation. So we need the input of good friends, of people who've practiced on the path at least a few more steps than us, if possible, to the point of stream winning, or, hopefully people who are living ethical lives. And I would say that this is the kind of minimum requirement that you need for, following a teacher. Quite often people ask me, how do we find a good teacher? Because it is so beneficial, to have someone to talk to, someone to check your understanding with, and to, clarify any doubts. And the most important thing as a baseline, which is not always a given, is to check that person's conduct. There are people in this world, there's a book written by one of them, who names himself on the front cover, the Arahat. And then continues to talk through this book with certain chapters where it says, red warning, warning, this chapter is very controversial. Arahats still have anger. How do I know this? Because I'm an Arahat and I still have anger. Isn't that just horrible? Would you like to be enlightened if you still have anger? What would the point be? Just so you can tell yourself that you're enlightened. But if you have anger, you're going to suffer and you're going to cause so much suffering for others. So the point of this path is to reach a place where there's no more delusion. It's impossible to generate ill will or desire. And that is the true freedom. That is the true goal of the holy life and of any spiritual life. So look for people who at least have their act together in terms of virtue. And any scandal, just if you can, I mean, of course, sometimes it might be worth inquiring, but believe the people who call out bogus teachers. Even in the Vinaya, and it's just recently been retranslated by, I think translated for the first time actually, the full Vinaya into English by Ajahn Brahm, who is now a honorary doctorate, has an honorary doctorate, so he's Dr. Brahmali.
Yeah. Permanent head damage.
Yes, exactly. I'm sure, I think he's been teased quite a lot over that. But one of the things that's very clear around things like allegations of sexual abuse is that in most of the Vinaya, in order to be found guilty of an offence, if you like of a breach of conduct, the monk or nun has to confess, right? Only if they actually confess can they kind of take remedial action, or the Sangha can take remedial action, which is usually some kind of penance, or if it's a really serious offence, they have to disrobe. But in the case of sexual misconduct, if somebody's accused of sexual abuse, the woman should be believed. So if a woman says that this monastic or this teacher has abused me in some way, they should be believed, even if that person doesn't own up. And I think that's very wonderful. Bhante Sujato did some kind of research on this and found that a woman's testament is usually as accurate as a decision from the courts. It's about 5% inaccuracy, so 95%, which is about the same as somebody who's gone through the court systems and had a case agreed. So the Vinaya is actually very radical in that sense, very progressive in a way, and certainly, keeping up with the laws of today. And so if there's any doubt around a person's conduct, no matter how wise they sound, no matter how sophisticated their Dhamma talks, way more sophisticated than me, I have no experience in giving a talk, of any kind of training in giving a talk. It's just through the love of the Dhamma and out of compassion that I give it a go. So don't be, misled by people who claim attainments and people who give wonderful talks. Look for their virtue, look for their integrity, and don't look for perfection either. Even the Buddha was criticized. Even the Buddha, wasn't always giving the right advice to people at the right time. Human beings are fallible, so we're not looking for a perfect human being, but we are looking for someone with virtue and someone you can trust, someone who is teaching the Dhamma that the Buddha taught. This is really essential. And also for people here, if you're not living in monasteries, I guess, most of you, try to associate with other Dhamma practitioners. Try to have regular meditation groups, maybe even in your home, or come to online teachings or in-person teachings as often as you can, because really, this whole process, again, what we take as our body and mind is conditioned, and we need to make that reconditioning very, very strong. So associating with good persons is necessary to hear the Dhamma and to develop that faith. And eventually that faith becoming full leads all the way to freedom. So I have gone over time by 1 minute, and I haven't finished the sutta, so I'm not sure. Would you like me to read it in reverse order now, so that you have a full picture of where this is going? So I'm not going to be able to do much commentary on this, but perhaps this could be a subject for tomorrow, because there's a lot of beauty. It's not the reverse order exactly. There are some other factors that come into the reverse. So let's go the other way. Meditators, true knowledge and liberation have a nutriment, the 7 factors of enlightenment. The 7 factors of enlightenment have a nutriment, the 4 focuses of mindfulness, that's the 4 satipatthanas. The 4 focuses of mindfulness have a nutriment, the 3 kinds of good conduct. The 3 kinds of good conduct have a nutriment, Restraint of the sense faculties. Restraint of the sense faculties has a nutriment. Mindfulness and wisdom. Mindfulness and wisdom have a nutriment. Careful attention. That should be yoniso manasikara, in brackets there. Careful attention has a nutriment. Faith. Faith has a nutriment. Hearing the good Dhamma, or the true Dhamma. Hearing the true Dhamma has a nutriment. Associating with good persons. Thus, associating with good persons, becoming full, so this is where the significance of good persons lies. Associating with good persons, becoming full, fills up hearing the true Dhamma. Hearing the true Dhamma or the good Dhamma, becoming full, fills up faith. Faith, becoming full, fills up careful attention. Careful attention, becoming full, fills up mindfulness and wisdom. Mindfulness and wisdom, sati sampajanya, becoming full, fills up sense restraint. Restraint of the sense faculties, becoming full, fills up the 3 kinds of good conduct. The 3 kinds of good conduct, becoming full, fill up the 4 focuses of mindfulness. The 4 focuses of mindfulness, becoming full, fill up the 7 factors of enlightenment. The 7 factors of enlightenment, becoming full, fill up true knowledge and liberation. Thus, there is nutriment for true knowledge and liberation, and in this way they become full. So there's your solution to delusion. Just hang out with good people. Simple as that. Isn't that amazing? When the rain pours down in thick droplets on a mountaintop, the water flows down along the slopes and fills the clefts, gullies and creeks. These becoming full fill up the pools. These becoming full fill up the lakes. These becoming full fill up the streams. These becoming full fill up the rivers, and these becoming full fill up the great ocean. Thus there is nutriment for the great ocean, and in this way it is full. Okay, so we will end there for today. I hope you enjoyed that teaching.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.